Hey y'all, I want to talk about paper today because I'm finding that how I use paper is different than when I was working. And as my pen collecting has evolved, so have my ideas about paper. So we've all probably had the experience of trying to sign a credit card slip or a receipt in a restaurant or something, and the crappy ballpoint they give you won't write on the slick paper. So you pull out a fountain pen, and if you have a broad nib, a really wet writing pen, that might work. If you've got an extra fine nib, you're probably not going to get much better result than you did with the ballpoint. And it sort of occurs to me that this is dumb, that if my business were reliant upon people signing credit card receipts, that I'd probably want to have a paper that worked with various kinds of pens. Oh, I don't know, seemed like a good idea. Anyway, during my collecting journey, it used to be that when I was working, that's kind of important. That if I had a pen that had too much feedback, or that I didn't really enjoy how it felt moving across the page, I blamed the pen. I didn't blame the paper, I blamed the pen. And in part, I wasn't wrong about that, in the sense that if you buy pens to use, as I do, I buy them to have and to look at, but I also buy them to use, then you need to have pens that work in the situations in which you write. And at work, at least until I was the boss, I couldn't really control what papers I had to sign or what I had to write on, or what paper students turned into me and I had to scribble comments on. So yeah, I needed pens that worked across paper situations. Oz, they know you're here. Cool. On the other hand, paper does make a difference, obviously, to how the pen feels. And here I must say it's completely stupid for me to be doing this video, because it's really all about feel and touch. And you can't feel and touch in this video, so I'm sorry. You can, however, enjoy my new chapeau, which I paid $40 for, so I'm wearing it, damn it. Now, of course, at one point I became the boss at work, and I insisted that we buy a bit nicer, more expensive paper for the printers. So for the most part, I could control the paper a little bit better, and I wasn't grading physical papers anymore. And there's a lot going on in the neighborhood this morning, so I could control my paper situation a little bit more then. But I had to go to meetings a lot, and I had to take notes at meetings. And although, yes, Tomoe River was the standard for those of us who like fountain pens, I didn't always want to spend that much, or I didn't like the form factors in which Tomoe River paper came. So I tended to use Rhodia, actually, which I liked very much. Rhodia is a great paper, not terribly expensive, good for fountain pens. There are now lots of different form factors in which you can find Rhodia paper. But at the time that I started using it, you could basically only get those big pads where they fold over the back, which is an interesting design, but is irritating to me because it doesn't lie flat enough on the page. Now you can get Rhodia that's spiral bound, you can get side bound, you can get Rhodia notebooks, you can get all kinds of things. One of the things I did appreciate about Rhodia paper, besides the fact that it worked generally well with fountain pens, is that most of their pads of paper, their pages are perforated, and that is a great thing if you're working and going to various meetings and you want to be able to tear a page out and put it in a notebook, or after a meeting, or tear it out and burn it so nobody knows that you were just doodling during the meeting. And then I discovered Nemosine. I love these. Now, I don't love the spiral bound. I'm not fond of the spiral bound, but it does mean that if you're sitting at a table with a whole bunch of people, you can flip it over and not take up too much space. Lies flat. They have different kinds of rules. This is one that I came to like because I could title it and put a date up here, which helped in my filing later, and very importantly, the perforating. Also, when I take notes at meetings, or when I took notes at meetings, what I would tend to do is I do most of my note taking over here, and then often I draw a line here, and on that side of the line would be things I wanted to look up later, or questions I wanted to ask of somebody, or something that wasn't quite the flow of the meeting, but sort of the flow of my thinking. Well, these Mnemosyne pages are divided this way, so I started kind of using the bottom section. You can't see it particularly well. There's a somewhat darker line dividing this into 3 parts. So I started using the bottom part here for those kinds of notes to myself. So this became a very good meeting paper. This paper it's good for fountain pens, doesn't absorb, it's not particularly absorbent, so, but it is absorbent enough that inks dry quickly, which is, again, helpful in a meeting. It doesn't show off sheening and those kinds of properties terribly much, but it will a little bit. So that became a kind of good standard. But then I retired. And guess what? I don't need to go to meetings so much anymore. I don't need to take notes about things unless it's notes about my reading, and then I want something much smaller. So now, when I do occasionally have to go to a meeting or something, I use my little plotter notebook. This is the Bible size, so it's smaller than an A5. It has these great, it's not perforated, but this is actually a little notepad in there, and it's gummed, and so this will pull out very easily. It's a little binder, so you can move things around. Still figuring out exactly how I want to use this, but I like it, and that's become a little bit of a meeting thing. But what do I mostly do now that I'm retired when it comes to writing? Well, I journal, and A5 continues to be my standard with journaling. In this particular notebook, I happen to have an Odyssey notebook from Taroko Design. They're on Etsy. And their papers are all very good for fountain pens. Some of their notebooks are Tomoe River. This particular notebook is not, but I don't believe it's not marked what paper it is, and I don't remember. But again, it's a step up, I would say, from the Mnemosyne, but it is not, and so it takes all kinds of inks very well. It does show some sheening, not a lot. This is my journal, so I don't really want to show you individual pages, but it is a great all-round paper. I also use various notebooks from Taroko for a book that I'm writing. Very pleased with that paper. Not very expensive. Have to get it on Etsy. I also write letters and send cards. So I started, when I first retired, I started writing letters using either Tomoe River blank paper in little A5-ish note paper sizes. And then sometimes I'd use Clairefontaine, G. Lalo, which I didn't like a whole lot. A friend of mine uses laid paper, and I tried that. I really like that. Now, laid paper is textured. I'm not going to be able to really show it to you, but it's textured, but not heavily textured, just a little bit. So there's a nice feel. It's still, if you get a good quality paper, it will show off some ink properties fairly well, and it's a lot of fun to play with if you're an ink slinger, right? If you like blobbing a bunch of ink on a page and seeing what it'll do. But I had those in 8.5 by 11 sheets, and frankly, I just don't have that much to say to my friends. So really, the A5 thing was better. Went to the Chicago Pen Show, and Papier Plume had some Italian paper from Fabriano Now Fabriano makes all kinds of papers. They make a lot of papers for drawing, for writing, of course, notebooks, Italian paper brand. This happens to be their Medioevalis line. And these notebooks I thought were kind of cool because this is not a perforation line, but it is, so you can tear this off and then you fold it. It's just, it's you can put the date up here. It's a nice little mark on this gummed sheet. Very heavily textured paper, but still fountain pen friendly. So this is not the copy paper that I used to fight with my fine and extra fine nibs. This will work okay with the fine nib. It'll work okay with the broad nib. It does slow me down, right? I have to write more slowly to enjoy this paper, which means I write slightly more legibly, and it feels a bit like an event when I sit down to write with this paper. So I'm really enjoying this. And then I discovered, sometimes I don't want to write a letter. I need to just write, I want to write happy birthday and send a card. And so then I discovered that Fabriano makes this Medioevalis paper in little card and little note card sheets. Well, excellent. So I did that for a while, and then I thought, well, it's a crew, and it's nicely textured, but I like color. So I started slinging some ink on these cards, and I was having so much fun with that I started doing it on the envelopes. And this has become a huge pleasure for me. One, because I enjoy sending these little note cards to people. Two, because I acquire quite a few glittering inks, I still don't like to put in my fountain pens, especially if those fountain pens are not cartridge converter. If there's a converter filled, then I'll do it, because generally those are much easier to clean, to disassemble. If you really can't get the converter clean, throw it out and buy another $2 converter. But I really do not like to use these inks in piston filled pens. Since I've been buying more expensive pens, they're tending to be piston filled. Thus, I'm not really using the sheening ink. But I am finding in retirement that I like having control over my papers, and I enjoy exploring what combinations work for me, what nib on what paper, what pen on what paper. But I still like a pen that will serve me in all circumstances. By the way, by and large, that's a Pilot Vanishing Point.